They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when your own blood tries to drain you dry? I'm about to tell you the story of the day my sister and mother walked into a lawyer's office with designer bags and entitlement, ready to take everything, and walked out with nothing but the truth they'd been running from for 26 years. You think you know betrayal? You think you understand what it means to be backstabbed by family? I couldn't believe it myself when it happened. When the slap landed and the papers slid across the table, and I realized that the people who were supposed to love me had been plotting my erasure like it was just another Tuesday. But here's what they didn't know, what nobody knew, what was buried so deep in legal documents and old money and a dead woman's revenge. I was never the charity case. I was never the forgotten one. I was the one holding all the cards the entire time. I just didn't know I was playing. What happened next didn't just expose their greed. It exposed something darker, something that's probably happening in your family right now while everyone smiles for the camera and pretends everything's fine. So buckle up, because this isn't just about inheritance or money or houses. This is about the moment I discovered that sometimes the universe doesn't forget who deserves justice. It just waits for the perfect moment to deliver it. And trust me, when that moment came, it was absolutely devastating. I still feel the sting on my cheek when I close my eyes. Not from the pain, that faded in seconds, but from the sheer audacity of it all. My own mother, standing there in the middle of our family lawyer's office, her hand raised like I was some disobedient child who'd forgotten her place. The slap echoed through that mahogany-paneled room louder than any scream ever could. And in that moment, I couldn't believe what was happening. My sister Vivian smirked from her leather chair. My mother's eyes burned with entitlement, and I realized this wasn't about grief or family anymore. The humiliation wasn't just physical. It was the way everyone froze, the way the lawyer's assistant looked away, pretending she hadn't witnessed a grown woman being treated like garbage. My mother leaned in close, her breath hot against my face, and hissed those words I'll never forget. Sign the papers, Margot, and stop being selfish for once in your miserable life. Selfish. Me. The one who'd spent 3 years watching Dad deteriorate while they vacationed in Monaco. The backstabbed daughter who'd sacrificed everything, now being shamed for daring to exist in a room where money was being discussed. Vivian uncrossed her legs, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. The estate is worth $8.4 million, Margot. You're holding up progress because of… what? Sentimentality? Her voice dripped with that practiced condescension she'd perfected over the years. This was family betrayal at its finest. My own blood treating me like an obstacle to their next luxury purchase. I stood there, cheek burning, watching them exchange glances like co-conspirators who'd already divided the spoils. The truth was crystallizing in my mind, sharp and cutting. They'd planned this. My hands trembled as I looked down at the documents they'd shoved across the table. Deed transfers, estate liquidation agreements, all requiring my signature to move forward with selling our family home, the house where I'd held Dad's hand through his final breath just 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. They couldn't even let his memory settle before turning his legacy into a real estate transaction. I felt the weight of every betrayal, every dismissal, every time they'd made me feel invisible pressing down on my shoulders. But something else was rising inside me too. Something they hadn't counted on. You don't actually need to do this the hard way, my mother said, her voice shifting to that fake sweetness she used when manipulation was her goal. We're family, darling. This is just paperwork. Your father would have wanted… I cut her off. Don't. My voice came out steadier than I expected. The infidelity to Dad's wishes, to everything he'd actually valued, was choking me. They were lying, rewriting history to suit their greed, and expecting me to play along like I always had. The shocking part wasn't their audacity, it was how little they tried to hide it anymore. The lawyer cleared his throat, and I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, maybe. Or pity. He adjusted his glasses and said quietly, "Mrs. Hartwell, perhaps we should review the actual legal requirements before we proceed." My mother waved him off like he was an annoying waiter, but I caught it. That slight emphasis on legal requirements. Vivian's perfectly painted smile faltered for just a second. And in that tiny crack, I felt something shift, like the ground beneath their confidence was starting to crumble. Later, people would ask why I didn't call the police right there, why I didn't report the assault. But shock doesn't ask permission, it just paralyzes. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't over yet. Growing up in the Hartwell mansion wasn't the fairy tale people imagined when they saw the iron gates and manicured gardens. While Vivian got ballet lessons and European boarding schools, I got the leftover attention and hand-me-down explanations for why I wasn't quite enough. My mother would introduce us at charity galas with such different energy. Vivian was our shining star, and I was just our other daughter, Margot. The family drama started so early, I didn't even recognize it as abnormal until I was older. I thought every family had a golden child and a shadow, that this was just how things worked when you weren't special enough to deserve the spotlight. Vivian's childhood bedroom looked like a boutique hotel suite. Custom furniture, walk-in closet, balcony overlooking the rose garden. Mine was the smaller room at the end of the hall, the one that used to be a study before they converted it when I was born. Even our spaces told the story of who mattered and who didn't. She got new dresses for every occasion while I learned to be grateful for whatever fit from last season. The reclaiming of my dignity would take decades, but back then, I didn't even know I'd lost it. I just accepted that some people were born to shine and others were born to watch, to serve, to disappear into the background of someone else's perfect picture. Dad was different, though. He saw me. When Mom and Vivian would jet off to Paris or Milan for bonding trips, he'd stay behind with me and we'd work in his study together. He taught me about the business, about integrity, about building something that mattered beyond appearances. Those moments were my oxygen in a house that otherwise suffocated me. But even his love came with a price I didn't understand then. It made me the obvious choice when he got sick, when someone needed to sacrifice their life to keep him comfortable. Vivian had her career, her social calendar, her important obligations. I had time, apparently. Time to watch my father fade while everyone else lived. For 3 years, I became invisible in a different way. Not the ignored daughter anymore, but the caretaker no one wanted to acknowledge because it reminded them of mortality. My days blurred into medication schedules, physical therapy appointments, late-night conversations when Dad couldn't sleep, and memories were all he had left. Vivian would breeze in twice a year, pose for photos by his bedside, post something about cherishing family on social media, then disappear back to her glamorous life. Mom stayed away even more, claiming his illness was too difficult to witness. Meanwhile, I witnessed every moment, every loss of dignity, every small defeat, every quiet acceptance of the end. The revenge I didn't know I'd need was being written in those sacrificed years. No one asked if I wanted a life beyond those walls. It was simply assumed that this was my role, my purpose, my contribution to the family legacy. I managed the estate when Dad could no longer focus, handled the staff, made sure everything ran smoothly while slowly erasing myself in the process. My own dreams, teaching literature, maybe writing, having something that was mine, got shelved like books no one intended to read again. The karma of it all wouldn't become clear until much later, but I was building a resume of sacrifice that would eventually matter. Not to them, of course. To them, I was just doing what I was supposed to do. What any good daughter would do. The forgotten daughter. The convenient daughter. When Dad finally passed, I sat alone with his body for 2 hours before calling anyone. I needed that time, that silence, that last moment of being seen by the only person who'd ever really looked at me. The grief was oceanic, pulling me under in waves I couldn't fight. But there was something else mixed in. A strange relief that the waiting was over, that I could maybe, finally, start existing again. I had no idea that the real betrayal was just beginning, that the payback for all those years of service would be delivered with a slap and a stack of legal papers. I had no idea that invisible was about to become visible in ways I'd never imagined. They didn't even wait a month. 21 days after I buried my father, after I'd finally started sleeping through the night without jolting awake to check on him, the doorbell rang. I opened it expecting maybe a neighbor with condolences, or perhaps the estate manager with some paperwork. Instead, there stood my mother and Vivian, designer luggage stacked behind them like they were checking into a resort. No tears, no embraces. Just my mother's clipped voice saying, "We need to talk about the house." Not, "How are you holding up?" Not, "We should have been here sooner." Just business. Just greed dressed up in Chanel and cold calculation. I couldn't believe how quickly grief could be discarded when money entered the conversation. Vivian brushed past me into the foyer, her eyes already scanning the artwork, the furniture, the chandelier, appraising, calculating, claiming. "This place is worth a fortune now that the neighborhood's gone upscale," she said, not even pretending to care that our father's presence still lingered in every corner. My mother nodded, pulling out her phone to show me listings from luxury real estate agents. "We've already had it appraised, darling. $8.4 million, possibly more with the right marketing." The shocking audacity of it stole my breath. Dad's body was barely cold, and they were already planning the open house. I stood there in the kitchen where I'd made Dad's soup every evening, where we'd talked about literature and life and legacy, and watched these two strangers, because that's what they'd become, discuss square footage and market conditions. The infidelity to his memory was breathtaking. He'd loved this house, had built it with his first wife, had filled it with memories they were now eager to erase for profit. "We should list it within the month," Vivian said, scrolling through her phone. "The spring market is hot. We could have a bidding war." She said it with such excitement, such shameless enthusiasm, like she was discussing a vacation property, not the home where her father had died. My mother settled into Dad's favorite chair, the leather one he'd sat in every evening, the one that still held the impression of his body, and delivered the real blow. "Of course, we'll need your cooperation, Margot. The estate is complicated, but our lawyers say if we all agree, we can liquidate quickly and move on with our lives." Move on. As if the 3 years I'd spent here, the sacrifice, the love, the witnessing of death was just a chapter to close. As if moving on meant the same thing for someone who'd actually showed up. The betrayal was in every word, every assumption that I'd simply fall in line like I always had, that I'd sign away the only place I'd ever felt valued because they wanted their payday. "We've already found a buyer," Vivian added, her voice dripping with that false sweetness she used when she wanted something. "A tech executive, relocating from Seattle. He's offering asking price, cash, no contingencies. We could close in 30 days. 30 days. 1 month to erase a lifetime. The justice of it all, or rather, the complete absence of it, made my hands shake. They'd been planning this before Dad even died, I realized. Those phone calls Vivian took in hushed tones during her brief visits, my mother's sudden interest in estate planning those final weeks. They'd been circling like vultures, just waiting for the moment they could swoop in and claim what they'd never earned. I opened my mouth to speak, but my mother cut me off with a raised hand. "Before you get emotional about this, understand that keeping this house makes no financial sense. You can't afford the maintenance, the taxes, the upkeep. We're actually doing you a favor. A favor. The humiliation of being told that my grief, my connection to the only home where I'd mattered, was just impractical emotion that needed managing." Vivian pulled out a folder, already prepared, already assuming my compliance. "We just need a few signatures," she said, sliding papers across the marble counter. "Then we can all get our lives back." But as I looked down at those documents, something my father once said echoed in my mind. Something about truth and patience and how the law protects those who wait. The meeting with the family lawyer was supposed to be a formality. That's what my mother kept saying as we drove to his downtown office, her voice saccharine and controlled. "Just a simple transfer of assets, Margot. Nothing complicated." Vivian sat in the back seat, texting furiously, probably already planning how she'd spend her share. They'd orchestrated this whole thing like a corporate takeover, assuming I'd be too grief-stricken, too compliant, too invisible to question anything. The family betrayal was so casual, so routine to them, that they didn't even bother hiding it anymore. They actually believed I'd sit there, nod politely, and sign away everything without reading a single word. Mr. Thornton's office smelled like old books and expensive cologne. He'd been Dad's lawyer for 30 years, had drafted every contract, every trust, every legal document that built the Hartwell fortune. My mother swept in like she owned the place, Vivian close behind in her power suit and blood-red lipstick. They positioned themselves on either side of me at the conference table, a strategic formation meant to make me feel small, cornered, pressured. "Let's make this quick," Mom said, checking her watch. "I have a spa appointment at 3. The shocking disrespect, the complete disregard for what this meeting actually meant, should have warned me that something darker was brewing beneath their confidence. Mr. Thornton spread the documents across the table with careful precision. Deed transfers, estate liquidation agreements, power of attorney forms. Each one required my signature, my consent, my legal agreement to dissolve everything Dad had built. "As you can see," he began, his voice measured and professional, "the property transfer requires all beneficiaries to—" My mother interrupted him, her patience already thin. "She understands. We've explained everything. Margot knows this is what's best for everyone." But the way Mr. Thornton's jaw tightened, the way his eyes met mine for just a moment, told me there was something they weren't saying, something they didn't want me to know. I picked up the first document, actually reading it this time instead of just skimming like they expected. Legal language swam before my eyes, clauses about irrevocable transfers, release of claims, acknowledgement of receipt. Vivian sighed dramatically. "Margot, we don't have all day. Just sign so we can move forward." But there was something in her urgency, something desperate beneath the boredom. My mother's hand moved toward the pen, trying to push it closer to me, and that's when I saw it. A single line buried in the third paragraph. "This deed cannot be transferred without the explicit written consent of the primary deed holder." Primary deed holder. Not beneficiary, not heir, deed holder. "Who is the primary deed holder?" I asked, my voice cutting through their manufactured urgency. The room went silent. Vivian's eyes darted to Mom. Mom's face went carefully blank. Mr. Thornton cleared his throat, and I saw something flicker across his expression. Relief, maybe, that I'd finally asked the right question. "Well," he said slowly, pulling out another folder they clearly hadn't wanted him to open, "that's actually a pertinent question, Ms. Hartwell. According to the current deed registration filed in 1998 and updated in 2019, the primary deed holder is—" My mother lunged for the folder, her composure cracking. "That's not relevant to today's discussion. We're here to execute the estate plan, not review ancient paperwork." But Mr. Thornton held firm, his professional mask slipping to reveal something almost like satisfaction. "Actually, Mrs. Hartwell, it's entirely relevant. Without the primary deed holder's consent, none of these transfers are legally valid." He turned to me, and I saw it, the truth that was about to detonate their carefully constructed lie. Vivian's leg was bouncing under the table, a nervous tick I'd never seen before. Mom's perfectly manicured nails were digging into the leather armrest. The karma they'd spent years accumulating was about to come due, and suddenly their confidence was evaporating like morning fog. "The primary deed holder, Mr. Thornton continued, opening the file. "According to all legal documentation is actually—" And that's when everything changed. "Margot Elizabeth Hartwell." Mr. Thornton's voice rang out like a verdict, and the world tilted on its axis. My mother's face drained of color. Vivian's mouth actually fell open, her phone clattering onto the mahogany table. "I'm sorry, what?" Mom's voice came out strangled, barely controlled. "Mr. Thornton pulled out document after document, spreading them like evidence at a trial. The estate, the house, the investment accounts, all of it was placed in an irrevocable trust in 1998, established by Catherine Ann Morrison, Margot's biological mother. The truth hit like a physical blow. Catherine. She'd always been a shadow, a name I wasn't allowed to ask too many questions about. The woman I'd only seen in one faded photograph, the first Mrs. Hartwell who'd died when I was 2 years old. The mother I'd never known had been protecting me all along. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My hands trembled as Mr. Thornton continued, his voice steady and factual while my entire reality restructured itself. Catherine Morrison came from old money, textile industry, shipping, real estate. When she married your father, she brought considerable assets to the marriage, including the land where this house now stands. Before her death, she established a trust ensuring that everything she'd built would pass directly to her daughter. Her daughter. Me. Not the estate. Not the family. Me specifically, legally, irrevocably. The shocking revelation explained so much. Why Mom had always treated me differently. Why Vivian had been the golden child. Why I'd been kept separate, invisible, convenient, but never quite family. "This is ridiculous," my mother hissed, her composure completely shattered now. "I've lived in that house for 26 years. I raised children there. I was married to Edward there. You can't possibly suggest—" But Mr. Thornton cut her off with the cold efficiency of someone who'd been waiting years to deliver this truth. "You lived there as Mrs. Hartwell, yes. But the property was never transferred to you or your husband. Catherine's trust was explicit. The assets would be held in trust until Margot turned 25, at which point full ownership would transfer to her. That happened 3 years ago. 3 years ago. Right when Dad got sick. Right when I became the caretaker, the invisible daughter who sacrificed everything. Had he known? Had he kept me there? Kept me close because he knew this day would come?" Vivian finally found her voice, and it came out sharp with panic. "You're saying she owns everything? The house, the investments, all of it?" Mr. Thornton nodded, pulling out a financial statement that made my vision blur. "The current value of the trust assets is approximately $8.4 million in real estate, plus another $6.2 million in managed investment accounts that have been accumulating since Catherine's death. Total estate value, $14.6 million. $14.6 million. Money I'd never known existed, built by a mother I'd never known, protected by laws I'd never understood. The backstabbed daughter, it turned out, had been the heiress all along. The infidelity wasn't just emotional. They'd been living off my inheritance, spending my money, all while treating me like I should be grateful for scraps. My mother's face twisted into something ugly, something I'd never seen before, but suspected had always been there beneath the polite veneer. Edward never told us. He lied. He let us believe. The humiliation in her voice was delicious, the complete reversal of power so sudden she couldn't process it. Mr. Thornton's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slightest hint of satisfaction in his eyes. Mr. Hartwell was bound by the trust's confidentiality clause. He couldn't disclose the details until certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was his death. So Dad had known. He'd known the whole time that I'd inherit everything, that the years of sacrifice would eventually lead to this moment. He'd protected me the only way he could, with paperwork, with legal structures, with truth buried so deep they'd never thought to dig for it. "This changes nothing," Vivian said, but her voice shook. "We still have rights. We're family. You can't just—" But she could see it in my eyes now, the shift happening in real time. The invisible daughter was becoming visible, solid, powerful. Mr. Thornton slid one more document across the table, and this one was addressed to me. "Your mother left you a letter, Margot. It was to be delivered when the truth was revealed." My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope, seeing Catherine's handwriting for the first time. "My darling girl," it began. "If you're reading this, then you've discovered that you were never the forgotten one. You were always the protected one. What they took from you in love and recognition, I secured for you in law and legacy. The vengeance is not yours to take. It was mine to give. Build something beautiful with this freedom. You were always meant to shine." And in that moment, I understood that justice had been waiting patiently for decades to find its moment. Legally mine, practically untouched, because Dad never wanted this truth weaponized against me while I was already sacrificing everything. The silence in that office was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. The air itself seemed to freeze as the implications settled over us like snow burying a landscape. My mother stared at the documents spread across the table as if they were written in a foreign language she refused to learn. Vivian's perfectly composed mask had cracked completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. And me? I sat there feeling power flood through my veins for the first time in my entire life. Not the power of cruelty or revenge, not yet, but the simple, profound power of knowing I had choices. That I mattered. That the dignity they'd stolen from me for 28 years had been legally mine all along, just waiting for me to claim it. Mr. Thornton closed his files with careful precision, the sound crisp in the suffocating quiet. "I'll need time to review this," my mother finally said, her voice tight and controlled, trying to salvage some semblance of authority. But Mr. Thornton shook his head gently, almost apologetically. "There's nothing to review, Mrs. Hartwell. The trust is ironclad. Ms. Margot Hartwell is the sole owner and decision-maker for all assets previously held in trust." Sole owner. Sole decision-maker. The words hung there like a sentence being read in court. Vivian's hands were shaking now, her phone forgotten, her usual confidence evaporating. The reclaiming wasn't just about money or property. It was about every assumption they'd made about who had power and who didn't. I watched my mother's face cycle through emotions: shock, anger, calculation, fear. She'd spent decades as the lady of the manor, the widow Hartwell with her social status and country club membership and carefully curated image. Now she was realizing that she'd been a guest all along, living in someone else's house on someone else's money. The payback was written in every legal document, every clause, every signature from a woman who died 26 years ago, but had still managed to protect her daughter from beyond the grave. Catherine Morrison. Hartwell had known exactly what kind of woman her husband would marry next. She'd seen the future and built a fortress around me made of paper and ink and irrevocable law. Vivian stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. You can't possibly think you're going to keep everything for yourself. We're your family. We have rights, moral rights, if not legal ones." But even as she said it, I could hear the desperation. She'd built her entire life on the assumption that one day she'd inherit a fortune, that being the golden child meant golden rewards. The shocking truth was that all her preening, all her performance, all her carefully cultivated superiority had been based on a lie. She was the daughter who'd inherit nothing. I was the daughter who'd inherit everything. The karma of it was so perfect, it almost felt scripted. My mother tried a different approach, her voice softening into that manipulative sweetness I'd heard 1,000 times before. "Margot, darling, I know this must be overwhelming, but surely you can see that we should discuss this as a family. Your father would have wanted—" I held up my hand, cutting her off, and the power in that simple gesture nearly knocked me sideways. She stopped. She actually stopped talking because I told her to. "Don't tell me what my father would have wanted," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "And don't call me darling, not after what you did in this office, not after the slap, not after 28 years of making me feel like I didn't belong in my own family." The betrayal had been so complete, so thorough, that they'd forgotten I was even a person with feelings and rights and agency. They'd backstabbed me so consistently that it became routine, expected, just the way things were. But now the ground had shifted beneath their feet, and they were scrambling for purchase on a surface that no longer belonged to them. They kept calling it the estate, because admitting it was never his estate meant admitting it was never theirs. Mr. Thornton gathered his papers, clearly ready to leave us to process this new reality. I'll draft the necessary documentation to formalize the transfer and update all accounts to reflect current ownership. Margot, my office will be in touch next week to discuss next steps. Next steps. The future was suddenly, shockingly mine to decide. And as I looked at these two women who'd shamed me, mocked me, humiliated me, I felt something cold and clear crystallize in my chest. The revenge wouldn't be loud or violent. It would be calculated, legal, and absolute. I let them sit in that silence for exactly 30 seconds before I spoke. When my voice came out, it was calm, measured, and entirely mine. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from my house. My house. The words tasted like freedom. Vivian's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. You can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go? And there it was, the question I'd never been allowed to ask during all those years of sacrifice. Where was I supposed to go with my dreams? Where was I supposed to go with my life while I watched Dad die alone? The justice in this moment was so pure it almost hurt. I don't know, Vivian, but I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're resourceful, aren't you? The golden child, the successful one. My mother's face flushed red, anger finally breaking through her careful control. You ungrateful little... But Mr. Thornton cleared his throat, a gentle warning that we were still in his office, that there were witnesses, that anything she said now could be used against her later. She swallowed whatever venom she'd been about to spit and tried to regroup. Margot, please, think about what you're doing. This is emotional. You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. The shamed woman trying to shame me, using my grief as a weapon when she'd shown up 3 weeks after Dad's death talking about real estate prices. The infidelity to every value Dad had tried to teach me was breathtaking. But I wasn't that invisible girl anymore. That version of me had died somewhere between the slap and the truth. I'm thinking very clearly, I said, standing up from the table. I was taller than both of them, I realized. Had I always been taller? Or had I just spent so long making myself small that I'd forgotten my actual size? In fact, I've never thought more clearly in my life. You came to liquidate my assets. You brought paperwork to erase my father's legacy. You slapped me in a lawyer's office because I dared to hesitate. So no, Mother, I'm not being emotional. I'm being exactly what you taught me to be. Practical. The vengeance in my voice was quiet, controlled, devastating. I could see it landing, each word a precision strike against the foundation of their assumptions. Vivian tried one last manipulation, her eyes filling with theatrical tears. We're sisters, Margot. Blood. You can't just throw me out like I'm nothing. But the betrayal was too fresh, too complete. Like you're nothing, I repeated softly. The way you made me feel like nothing every single day of our lives. The way you posted photos of Dad on social media twice a year while I held his hand through chemo. The way you called me selfish in this very room an hour ago. Each question was a nail in the coffin of whatever relationship we'd pretended to have. The dignity I was reclaiming wasn't just about money. It was about refusing to pretend anymore that cruelty was love, that abuse was family, that I owed them anything beyond basic human decency. Mr. Thornton handed me a business card. My partner specializes in estate security and asset protection. I'd recommend giving her a call today. You'll want to change locks, update security codes, freeze any joint accounts, and establish clear boundaries. He said it matter-of-factly, but I caught the subtext. Protect yourself, because they're going to fight dirty. My mother stood, gathering her purse with shaking hands, her composure barely held together by pride and public image. You'll regret this, she said quietly. And for a moment I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of what her life would become without the house, without the status, without the story she'd been telling herself and everyone else for 26 years. Maybe, I acknowledged, walking toward the door. But it'll be my regret, on my terms, in my house. I opened the door, holding it for them like a hostess dismissing unwelcome guests. Vivian grabbed her designer bag, her face a mask of barely contained rage. As they walked past me, I added one more thing, my voice soft but unmistakable. "Oh, and I'll be having the estate accountant review all financial transactions from the past 5 years. Just to make sure everything was properly managed while Dad was ill and I was occupied." The implication hung in the air. "I know you took things, and now there will be consequences." My mother's step faltered, just for a second, and I knew I'd hit the mark. The karma was coming for everything they'd done, every boundary they'd crossed, every dollar they'd spent that wasn't theirs to spend. And as they walked out of that office, I felt something shift in my chest, something that felt dangerously close to peace. They were gone by sunset the next day. I stood at the window of what was now officially my study, Dad's old room where we'd spent so many quiet hours together, and watched the moving truck pull away. Vivian had hired the cheapest company she could find, a detail that spoke volumes about how quickly her financial reality had shifted. My mother sat in her Mercedes, refusing to help load boxes, her sunglasses hiding what I imagined were furious, humiliated tears. The shocking speed of their fall was almost dizzying. 24 hours ago, they'd walked into a lawyer's office expecting to divide millions. Now they were moving into a rented townhouse across town, the only place Vivian could secure on short notice. The family drama that had defined my entire life was ending not with a bang, but with cardboard boxes and a U-Haul. The social fallout started within hours. Small towns thrive on gossip, and wealthy small towns turn gossip into currency. By the time Vivian's moving truck left my driveway, 3 of my mother's country club friends had already called, ostensibly to check in, but really to confirm the rumors. Was it true about the inheritance? Had there really been a hidden trust? Was Margot Hartwell, the quiet one, the invisible one, actually the sole heir to the Morrison-Hartwell fortune? I didn't confirm or deny anything, but my silence was answer enough. The betrayal they'd experienced wasn't just financial, it was social annihilation. In circles where status was everything, they'd gone from matriarchs to cautionary tales overnight. The reclaiming of my dignity was destroying theirs in real time. Vivian's carefully curated Instagram went silent. No more posts about luxury brunches or designer shopping trips. Her last photo, a selfie in front of the family estate taken just days before Dad's death, now looked grotesque, a monument to her greed and miscalculation. The comments started pouring in as word spread. I heard she tried to steal the house from her sister. Apparently, the whole family was living off the daughter's money. The audacity to pose in front of a house that was never even hers. The court of public opinion was vicious, and for once, I wasn't the one being judged. The karma was playing out in real time across social media, and I didn't have to do anything but watch. The golden child was tarnishing in the harsh light of truth. My mother tried to salvage her reputation with a carefully worded statement to her social circle, something about family misunderstandings and legal complications, and supporting Margot through this difficult transition. But nobody bought it. Too many people had witnessed her treatment of me over the years, the casual dismissals, the way she'd introduce Vivian as my daughter, and me as Edward's daughter from his first marriage, even though I was very much her stepdaughter she'd raised since I was 2. The infidelity to basic human decency was catching up with her, and no amount of spin could erase decades of documented cruelty. Her charity board positions started quietly disappearing. Lunch invitations dried up. The social machinery that had sustained her identity was grinding to a halt. I found out through the estate accountant that Vivian had been receiving monthly allowances from the household accounts for years, $8,000 a month for family business expenses that ranged from spa treatments to vacation rentals. My mother had been doing the same, plus charging her personal shopping to estate credit cards that she'd somehow convinced Dad to authorize before he got too sick to track finances. The revenge I was enacting wasn't personal anymore. It was systematic. I filed reports with the accountant. I contacted credit card companies. I closed accounts that had been funding their lifestyles while I'd been changing bedpans and managing medication schedules. Every revelation was another nail in the coffin of their credibility, another piece of evidence that the invisible daughter had been subsidizing the visible ones all along. Within 2 weeks, Vivian's car, a leased BMW she could no longer afford, was repossessed from outside her new townhouse. The neighbors watched, of course. In this town, everyone watched everything. My mother tried calling me exactly once, her voice tight with barely controlled desperation. "Margot, we need to talk about this situation like adults." But I didn't need to talk about anything. The legal documents had done all the talking necessary. "I think 24 hours was generous," I said simply. "Some people might have called the police and had you removed as trespassers." The shocked silence on the other end of the line told me she'd never even considered that possibility. That the house she'd lived in for decades had never legally been hers, that every day she'd spent there after Catherine's death had been at the mercy of a trust she'd never known existed. I hung up before she could respond, and I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Peace came quietly, like dawn breaking after the longest night of my life. I woke up one morning 3 weeks after the lawyer's office confrontation, and the house felt different. Not emptier, actually fuller somehow. Without their presence, without the constant weight of judgment and dismissal, the walls seemed to breathe easier. I made coffee in the kitchen without wondering if I was using the good cups that were supposedly reserved for guests. I sat in the library without feeling like I was intruding on someone else's space. Every room that had been a battlefield was now simply mine, a home, not a proving ground. The self-worth I'd been denied for 28 years was rebuilding itself brick by brick, moment by quiet moment. I hired a new estate manager, someone who worked for me, who called me Ms. Hartwell, with respect in their voice instead of that patronizing tone I'd grown accustomed to. We walked through the property together, and I found myself making decisions, real decisions, about gardens and repairs and updates. "What do you think about converting the East Wing into a library?" I asked, and she didn't laugh or dismiss it. She pulled out her tablet and started taking notes. That simple validation, that basic acknowledgement that my ideas mattered, nearly brought me to tears. The dignity of being heard, of being taken seriously, was something I'd been starved for so long I'd forgotten what it tasted like. Now I was feasting on it, reclaiming every inch of myself that had been eroded by their neglect. The truth about my inheritance had spread through town like wildfire, but the narrative had shifted in ways my mother and Vivian couldn't control. People remembered now, remembered how I'd stayed when they'd left, how I'd cared for Dad when they'd been too busy, how I'd never asked for anything while they'd demanded everything. The local newspaper even ran a piece about Catherine Morrison's legacy, about how she'd been a pioneering businesswoman in the 1980s and 90s, how she'd built an empire that was now being honored by her daughter's stewardship. They interviewed me, and I talked about Dad, about caregiving, about the invisible work that women do that never makes headlines until money's involved. The shocking part was how many people reached out afterward. Other caregivers, other invisible daughters, other people who'd been taken for granted by their families. Vivian tried to reconcile exactly once, showing up at the gate with Starbucks and crocodile tears. "I've been thinking about everything," she said through the intercom, her voice small and calculated. "Maybe we both said things we didn't mean. Maybe we can start over." But I'd learned something crucial in these weeks of solitude and healing. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and family doesn't require proximity. "I forgive you," I told her honestly, "but I don't trust you. And I don't need you in my life." The payback wasn't about making them suffer. It was about refusing to let them make me suffer anymore. I pressed the button to close the gate, and I didn't watch her drive away. She was already in my rearview mirror, a chapter closed, a lesson learned. My mother never tried to contact me again after that single failed phone call. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to Arizona, to be near some cousin I'd never met, starting over in a place where nobody knew the story. Vivian got a job, an actual job, working in marketing for a local real estate firm. the irony of which wasn't lost on anyone. Her Instagram eventually came back online, but the content was different now. Less performance, more reality. I didn't follow her, but sometimes late at night I'd check, and I'd see glimpses of a person I might have liked if we'd met as strangers. But we weren't strangers. We were sisters who'd been pitted against each other in a game neither of us had chosen, and only one of us had known the rules to. I stood on the balcony of my bedroom, the master suite I'd moved into after they left, the room with the view of the gardens Catherine had planted before I was born, and watched the sun set over property that was mine. Not by marriage, not by luck, but by birthright, by law, by a mother's love that had transcended death itself. The vengeance had been served cold and legal and absolute. The justice had been poetic and complete. But what I felt now wasn't triumph or vindication. It was something simpler and more profound. It was the bone-deep peace of finally being home in my own life, in my own skin, in my own story. The invisible daughter had become visible, and she was never, ever disappearing again. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever been the invisible one in your family? The one who gave everything while someone else got all the glory? Drop a comment below and tell me your story, because I know I'm not alone in this. Have you ever discovered a truth that completely flipped your understanding of your family? Have you ever had that moment where you realized the people you'd been sacrificing for never actually deserved it? And here's the real question that keeps me up at night. If you suddenly had the power to reclaim everything that was taken from you, would you use it? Or would guilt and obligation pull you back into the same cycle? I want to hear your honest thoughts. No judgment. Just real talk about family, betrayal, revenge, and what justice actually looks like when you're the one holding the cards. Did I go too far? Should I have been more forgiving? Or did they get exactly what karma had been saving up for them all along? Tell me in the comments what you would have done differently. Or if you've lived through something similar, share your experience, because someone reading this right now probably needs to hear it. And listen, if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family dynamics, or gave you permission to stop shrinking yourself for people who don't see you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because I've got more stories like this, more truths about dignity, self-worth, and what happens when the underestimated finally step into their power. This channel is for everyone who's ever been told they were too much or not enough, who's ever been backstabbed by the people who should have protected them. We're building a community here of people who refuse to stay invisible, who choose themselves even when it's uncomfortable, who understand that sometimes revenge isn't about cruelty. It's about finally choosing your own peace. So subscribe, stay connected, and let's keep having these real, raw, necessary conversations together. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And you deserve to be seen.